What's up, nerds and nerdettes and wee little nerdlings all? Your buddy Big Johnny G from Two Gun Pixie Presents Legendary Gaming is back again! Alright, it's been, I think it's been about a week since I've dropped a Midday Monologue. Now, I just want to tell you something that this almost wasn't a Midday Monologue today. This was almost a product review. Almost a product review, but not quite. Why? Well, I think this is more of a rant what I'm about to do. And therefore, I thought it would fit better during the Midday Monologue. And I just wanted to get it done. I really wanted to get it done. So, as you probably noticed from the thumbnail, I recently came out in May, I recently got Gary Gygax and the creation of D&D, Rise of the Dungeon Master graphic novel. And this is 136 pages of the life of Gary Gygax in D&D, or at least that's what it says it is. So why don't we go over and talk about exactly what it is I think about this. Now, anyone that's been watching these videos, if you've gotten to know me at all a little bit, and especially if you've watched an earlier video that I dropped a couple of months ago called Who the Heck is Big Johnny G, then some of this stuff you already realize, you may remember, but I'm going to go over it anyway because I think it's important for this drop for me to mention the information. Now, I'm 48 years old. I've been playing D&D since I was about 8 years old. 8 years old is when I started. Summer of 77, I discovered Star Wars and Dungeons and Dragons, and that literally changed my life, those two things. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons actively since then, though not always Dungeons and Dragons, different role-playing games. I remember the early days of RPGs, the early days of TSR with Star Frontiers and Gamma World and Gangbusters and Boot Hill and Top Secret, Metamorphosis Alpha. Great games, love them. Me and my friends love them all to one degree or another. And even non-TSR games, such as Man, Myth, and Magic, Tunnels and Trolls, Bushido, Villains of Vigilantes, Champions, the Marvel game, that was originally by TSR, the old phase rip system, fighting, agility, strength, endurance, reason, intuition, and psyche. After all these years, I still remember that. So I have a huge, long background in role-playing games. I have been DMing since about my second year playing. So you figure since '79, I've been running games in any of the role-playing games I play. So I was really highly anticipating getting this graphic novel. I also love comic books. I love comic books so much. I love superhero genre. It's modern day mythology. I can't get enough of it. So when they combined the two and they decided to make a graphic novel on the life of Gary Gygax, and the creation of Dungeons and Dragons, I just had to get it. Gary Gygax is a hero of mine because he taught me that, this fat, nerdy kid from the 70s growing up in New York City, he didn't have to love sports. He didn't have to love camping and hiking and hunting or any of those things. And he could still have a good life. He could still have a fun life. And to this day, I thank Gary. I thank his family because they're all almost as responsible for D&D as he is because of all the massive play testing that Ernie Jr. did, Luke did, Heidi, Elsa. Gygax was involved in some of the early print ads, actually. So not just Gary, but his entire family, I really just have to give a shout out to. And I'm not alone in this. There's thousands, if not millions, of people just like me that would just love to shake any one of those family members' hands and say thank you. Thank you so much. So I was really looking forward to getting through this. Graphic novel's not going to take long to read. I probably know most of the information I'm thinking going into it. I've read Of Dice and Men. Empires of the Imagination, brilliant book. Definitely, if you're interested in D&D, definitely got to check out Empires of Imagination. I know there's another one I haven't read yet. A lot of people told me I should check it out. It's called Playing at the World. I don't know anything about that. So I was very excited to get Gary Gygax in the creation of D&D. And as any good dungeon master, I have my notes. No, this entire book is not notes just on the graphic novel. I have a lot of different notes in this book. But for the page that's open right now, I have my notes concerning my thoughts on this. So why don't we just get right into it? First of all, I just want to say up front that I think that being presented in a graphic novel form makes it more accessible than a novel. I think that was a fairly good decision, especially since, like I said, there's already other novels, well, not novels, but books, because they're nonfiction. There are other books out already depicting the life of Gary Gygax. I thought this was a good approach. It's a kind of approach that'll get people interested that wouldn't normally be reading, a full-length book, a hardcover. It's good for kids. It'll definitely grab the kids' attention. If you have a kid, or if you are a kid and you've wondered about the history of Dungeons and Dragons and the guy who created it, because let's face it, nobody can tell you who created Monopoly, nobody can tell you who created Life, nobody can tell you who created Parcheesi, but people can tell you who created Dungeons and Dragons. So if you're interested, it's good for that. It's definitely going to open the door to let people in to check out more about this guy's life and the history of the game. But just to, let me move this over. Woo, let me get me in view. All right. So a couple of the points that I wanted to point out was that the timeline, the chronology is off, is wrong. David Kushner, I don't know if it was a lack of wanting to get things right. Maybe he was just crunched for time. Maybe he just decided to glaze over it that nobody would really care and notice. But for whatever the reason, a lot of the things in the chronology, in the timeline that he wrote down are just completely off. So as an old fan and somebody that knows a lot about the history, that definitely turned me off. There's a lot of little things. Right now, what I'm going to do here to open this up is really a bunch of nitpicking. So please bear with me. So a couple of things. The 20-sided die. The world famous 20-sided die, D20, originally did not go from 1 to 20. Something that's never mentioned in this book. In fact, the way it's written about it, it sounds like the 20-sided die was always exactly what it is, and that's not true, because originally it ran from 0 to 9 twice. Also, when the basic was first released, it sold out so fast they didn't have enough dice ready for the second publishing of it, so they actually put little numbered cardboard bits, these little chits, from 1 to 20, and I think this was so you could like put it in a hat or a bag or a cup and randomly draw a number to see if you succeed. Chainmails. The game was originally called Chainmail when that originally came out. That was not originally published by TSR. As the graphic novel points out, it was originally published by Gwydion Games. TSR was formed later by Gary, and I think Dave might have been involved in it. The initial creation of that, Tactical Studio Rules, but yeah, that was created later, and then that picked up the Dungeons and Dragons basic game and started publishing it. But Gwydion was the first company to publish it, not TSR. Also says that TSR was quadded in 1982. The company was broken up into subcategories for business sake, but that actually happened in 1980, not 1982. Again, I'm just nitpicking here, but if you're going to get the facts right and you're going to, call this a factual biography book, then please get everything right. The now famous Gygax Arnson lawsuit did not happen when Lorraine Williams took control of TSR. That's actually something that happened a couple of years prior to Lorraine's entrance into TSR and destroying it to make second edition, as a lot of people think, and eventually from there even ousting Gary from his own company. Also, another thing that was mentioned was that the Player's Handbook for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was the first Advanced Dungeons and Dragons book to come out, and that is not true. The first Advanced Dungeons and Dragons book to come out was actually the Monster Manual. I know, you're thinking to yourself, well, how can you have a Monster Manual if you don't actually have the rules from the DM's guide and the rules for characters in the Player's Handbook? Well, that's the way it was done. Gary was collecting money off of basic set while he was working on the advanced set, and the first thing that was his passion was the monsters, and that's what he worked on first. And after that, the Player's Handbook and the DM's Guide came out. Again, if you're gonna mention these things, then at least get them right. And I would expect more from David Kushner who's a world-leading journalist, an award-winning journalist. I figured he would have done a little bit more of his homework on that. Actually, speaking of which, this entire graphic novel is really just a beefing up of an article that he did, that David Kushner, the author, did for Wired magazine in 2008, which dropped, I think, a couple of months before Gary died. And he had met Gary Gygax, and he had met with Dave Arnson, and collaborated on getting the correct information. And then shortly after, Gary passed away. Now, as far as this goes, one of the things that bothered me about it has nothing to do with the timeline of the information, is the art by Karen, let me make sure I get this right, Shadmi, Koren, Koren, Koren Shadmi. Apparently a lot of people love, I didn't dislike it, I just didn't like it. I'm kind of on the fence with the artwork. It worked well enough, but considering all the great art that has been involved in Dungeons and Dragons over the years, from Errol Otis all the way up, to Elmore, I think that they could have done a better job on the art, definitely. But like I said, that's just me. Apparently, a ton of people love this artist. But I did have a problem with also the fonts that were used. Because he did the story very interestingly. I have to say that he did it in a second person, which you don't see a lot of writing done in second person these days. But he tried to do it as if he was the DM, DMing you through several periods in Gary's life. So because of that, the font changes depending on what exactly, whether it's a narration or whether it's a quote. And a lot of the narration is done in this font that looks like something you would use for a horror story. And I really totally didn't get it, and that totally put me off reading all the narration bits. It just didn't make sense. You know, if he was doing if Kushner was writing a biography on George Romero, rest in peace, I would understand that font. But I didn't understand that for this and for Gary's work and for D&D. It wasn't correct. It wasn't right. Now, I said earlier that being a graphic novel, this may be good in pulling kids in to try to read and learn more about the history. But the one thing I do want to warn you about, especially if you're one of the parents watching this, is that there's at least one drop of the F-bomb. I don't know if that's a big deal to you, especially if it's only just one drop. That's up to you, the parent, to figure out. And there's also mention that, see, for a time, Gary was working with the TSR Hollywood section, the entertainment section, and he was spending a lot of time living in Hollywood, and he made a lot of Hollywood stars as friends. He's living in a mansion, living the high life. But because he was meeting so many Hollywood people and so many movie people, there is actually a part in the book that references the fact that there was a porn star during the 70s and 80s who was a huge fan of Dungeons and Dragons. Like the way Stephen Colbert or Vin Diesel talk about it this day is the way this porn star was talking about it. So that's mentioned in the book. I don't know if you want your kids reading that or not. But those two quick little references are probably about the only thing I could see in the book that may make a parent question and be like, I don't know if I should have my kid read that because they're only blank years old. Fill in the blank. But I just wanted to put that up, let you know right up front about that. The narration style that it was done in second person worked for what this is. Because Dungeons & Dragons is a game where one person, the dungeon master, verbally leads you through scenario after scenario after scenario. I liked the way they did that, the way David Kushner did that in this graphic novel. I definitely think it worked. But again, it worked because of what this is, what the subject is. It's the only reason it worked. If this was done for anything else, I wouldn't have been happy with it, you know. One thing that he did get right that a lot of people over the years have gotten wrong, and I'm so happy about this, that David Kushner got this right. Thank you very much, David Kushner. Is that it's a misconception that Gary Gygax was a huge Tolkien fan. He wasn't. He found The Lord of the Rings to be a very boring story. He found it tedious. All it was walking and talking and talking and walking, and he found no substance to it whatsoever. And Kushner points that out, and he even points out that an even bigger influence to Dungeons and Dragons and Gary Gygax's life was actually the work of Robert E. Howard. Two Gun Bob, as his friends called him. Robert E. Howard, if you don't know that name, I guarantee you, you know something about him, because he's the guy that created Conan the Barbarian. So Gary was a lot more into the pulp style artwork, the pulp style stories, than he was into what Tolkien wrote. He wasn't a big fan of that. He wasn't a big fan of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe series either. Conan, that's where it is. That makes me happy because I am a huge Robert E. Howard fan. So to see that that once again, though it is very rare that this fact is gotten right, that definitely made me a little bit little happy. So overall, I would say that this is, like, as I started off with, this is good for somebody that just wants to kind of dip their toes, so to speak, into the waters of the history of Dungeons and Dragons and who Gary Gygax was. The title of the book makes it sound like it's going to be a more in-depth biography of Gary Gygax, and it's really not. It is a biography of Dungeons and Dragons, so therefore there is a lot of stuff about Gary, but it doesn't feel like a biography about him at all. If you want to read a really good book about the biography of him, then definitely check out Empires of Imagination, because that delves a lot deeper. It's a novel, it's a hardcover book, it's not a graphic, so there's a lot more. I think it's like 300 and something pages, so there's a lot more room to get meaty, which is exactly what it does. But for what this is, you know, for what this is, it works well enough. Just don't take it as a Bible to the timeline that things happened. There's a lot of people that weren't mentioned in the book that should have been from the early days. They should have been more mentioned of like the Bloom brothers and Cask, but you know, it is what it is. It's a graphic novel. It only has so many pages, and you're trying to dedicate it to basically two people, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. So it's going to fall at the wayside with everyone else. You're going to have to make your own decision. I actually was meandering through a Barnes & Noble last week when I found this, and it was bargained. I think it was $10 I got it for. For $10, it's definitely worth it. If you're looking to get the book, but you're a little bit on the fence, I would say $10, $12 should be the price range to pay for this book. So that's it. I wanted to rant about that a little bit because, like I said, I wasn't as happy with it as I thought I was going to be. And since it's a beautiful afternoon, a little warm for me, but still a beautiful afternoon, I figured to hell with it. I'm not going to wait to get home and set things up and do a full two-gun review on it. I felt like this deserved a midday monologue. And let me know if you think I was right about that. Maybe I should have put this in the review section, but to me, it felt more like a monologue. So, I'm your buddy Big Johnny G from Two Gun Pixie Presents Legendary Gaming. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We do a lot more nerdy stuff than just the gaming, but it's all nerd related, whether it's superheroes or board games or RPGs or Doctor Who or sci-fi, you know. Don't forget to subscribe. Please, if you like this video or any of the other videos you've seen, please hit that subscribe button down there. It definitely helps, and it makes me feel like what I'm doing is worthwhile, that people are enjoying this. You know, and if I know people are enjoying it, then there's no reason for me to stop doing this. All right, so I am